There is a room in the basement of a building in Edinburgh where, for 11 nights in the autumn of 2014, strangers spoke to each other without ever meeting. They were asleep. They were on different floors. The walls between them were lined with acoustic foam and medical-grade soundproofing. There was no intercom system. No shared audio feed. No television. No radio. No plausible mechanism by which one human voice could reach another. And yet, when researchers lined up the audio recordings, when they synchronized the timestamps and layered voice over voice, the result was not noise. It was not coincidence. It was a conversation. A coherent, structured, multi-participant conversation between people who had never met, conducted entirely in their sleep, about a place that, as far as anyone could determine, does not appear on any map. The study was defunded in November of 2014. The principal investigators were reassigned. The recordings were supposed to be destroyed. They weren't. One researcher kept copies. Unauthorized. Hidden on a personal hard drive she carried out of the university in her bag on the last day of the project. For nearly 8 years, she said nothing. Then, in 2022, she began uploading them, slowly, methodically, without commentary at first, to an anonymous podcast that currently has no listed host, no visible production team, and no affiliated institution. The podcast is called The Shared Room. And in the last 18 months, something else has happened. Something that wasn't supposed to be possible. Listeners, people with no connection to the original study, people scattered across different countries and continents, have begun to identify the location the sleepers were describing. Not from research. Not from maps. From recognition. They say they've seen it too. This is the story of the Edinburgh Sleep Convergence Study, the woman who saved its records from deletion, and the growing, deeply uncomfortable possibility that the place those sleepers were talking about is real, that it has always been real, and that more people have been there than anyone wants to admit. Let's start with what we know for certain. In the spring of 2014, the University of Edinburgh's Department of Psychology approved funding for a 12-week sleep study officially titled Somniloquy Patterns in Controlled Acoustic Environments. The project was led by Dr. Alastair Kahn, a senior lecturer in cognitive neuroscience with a particular interest in parasomnia, the broad clinical category that includes sleepwalking, night terrors, and sleep talking. Kahn had published several papers in the preceding years on the linguistic content of somniloquy, arguing that sleep speech was far more structured than the field had traditionally assumed. He believed that with proper recording equipment and controlled conditions, researchers could demonstrate that sleep speech followed identifiable grammatical patterns, perhaps even narrative ones, and that this might open new avenues for understanding how the brain processes language during unconscious states. The study was modest. It was not controversial. It was, by every account, exactly the kind of quiet, methodical research that university departments fund without much debate. 12 participants were recruited through standard channels, posted flyers, departmental email lists, a small compensation of £200 for the full duration. The criteria were straightforward. Participants needed to have a documented history of talking in their sleep, confirmed either by a partner or a previous clinical assessment. They needed to be in good general health. They could not be taking any medications known to affect sleep architecture. Of the 12 recruited, 11 completed the intake process. The 12th withdrew before the study began for reasons that were never recorded. The 11 remaining participants ranged in age from 22 to 51. 7 were female. 4 were male. They came from different neighborhoods, different professions, different backgrounds. Several had never set foot on a university campus before the study began. There is no evidence that any of them knew each other. The facility used for the study was the Dovecot Building, a small, somewhat aging annex attached to the psychology department. It had been retrofitted years earlier for auditory research, and several of its rooms featured professional-grade soundproofing, double-walled construction, acoustic foam paneling, sealed door systems designed to prevent sound bleed in either direction. The rooms were distributed across 3 floors. Each participant slept alone. Each room was equipped with a low-light infrared camera, a polysomnography rate to monitor brain activity during sleep, and, most critically, a high-sensitivity directional microphone positioned approximately 18 inches from the pillow. The microphones were the heart of the study. Khan wanted clean, isolated audio of each participant's sleep speech, free from ambient noise, free from contamination. And by all technical assessments, that is exactly what he got. The soundproofing worked. Room-to-room audio bleed was tested before the study began and measured at functionally 0. You could scream in one of those rooms and the microphone in the next would register nothing. The participants were acoustically sealed off from each other as completely as modern engineering allowed. The first 4 nights of the study produced results that were, by Khan's own notes, unremarkable but encouraging. Most participants talked in their sleep at least once per night. The content was largely what you'd expect: fragments of sentences, mumbled words, occasional short phrases that seemed connected to dream content. One woman repeatedly said the word Tuesday in a tone of mild irritation. A man on the second floor produced a nearly complete sentence about returning a library book. Standard somniloquy. Nothing unusual. Night 5 is where the data changed. The first anomaly was identified not by Khan but by his research assistant, a postdoctoral fellow named Dr. Marin Voss. Voss was responsible for the initial review of each night's audio, cataloging timestamps, transcribing audible speech, flagging anything that warranted closer analysis. On the morning after night 5, while reviewing the recordings from 3 participants, 2 on the ground floor and 1 on the second, she noticed something that made her stop, rewind, and listen again. At 2:47 a.m., a woman in room 3 said, clearly and without any slurring, "The water is closer now." At 2:47 a.m., the same minute, within seconds, a man in room 7, 1 floor above, said, "Yes. It always comes closer at night." And at 2:48 a.m., a second woman, in room 2, adjacent to room 3 but separated by a soundproofed wall, said, "We shouldn't be this near to the edge." Voss noted the timestamps. She noted the content. But she did not, at that point, flag it as anything more than a coincidence. Sleep researchers know that certain themes recur in somniloquy: water, falling, movement, pursuit, and it was entirely possible that 3 people had simply dreamed about water on the same night and vocalized at roughly the same time. Unlikely, but not impossible. The human mind is drawn to patterns, and Voss was trained to resist premature conclusions. Then she reviewed night 6. On night 6, the convergences were not limited to a single cluster. They occurred 4 separate times over the course of the night, involving 5 different participants across all 3 floors. And the content was no longer vaguely thematic. It was specific. It was sequential. It was, by any reasonable linguistic analysis, dialogic, meaning it had the structure of a conversation, with turns, responses, and what appeared to be shared reference. At 1:15 a.m., a participant in room 5 said, "The stones are wet. They've always been wet." At 1:15 a.m., a participant in room 9 said, "Not stones. Steps. They're steps." At 1:16 a.m., a participant in room 3, the same woman from the night before, said, "They go down further than you'd think." At 1:16 a.m., a participant in room 11 said, "I don't want to go down again." And at 1:17 a.m., a participant in room 7, again, the same man from the night before, said, "You don't choose. You're already there." Voss brought the recordings to Khan that afternoon. She played them in sequence. She showed him the timestamps. And according to a personal account she would later give, which we'll discuss in detail shortly, Khan listened to the full sequence twice without speaking. Then he removed his glasses, set them on the desk, and said, very quietly, "Check the soundproofing." They checked the soundproofing. They brought in a technician from the university's audio engineering department. They ran a full diagnostic on every room. They tested for electromagnetic interference, for vibration transfer through the building structure, for any conceivable pathway by which sound from one room might reach another. The results were unambiguous. The rooms were sealed. The participants could not hear each other. There was no audio bleed. There was no shared stimulus. There was no explanation. Khan ordered the study to continue. Nights 7 through 11 are where the data becomes, in a word, difficult. Difficult to explain. Difficult to rationalize. And, if the recordings that have since been made public are authentic, genuinely difficult to listen to. The convergences increased in frequency and duration with each passing night. By night 8, the synchronized sleep-speech events were occurring in clusters that lasted as long as 12 minutes, involving as many as 7 participants simultaneously. The content grew more detailed, more spatially specific, and more emotionally charged. The sleepers were no longer making isolated observations. They were describing a place, the same place, from what appeared to be different vantage points, with a consistency and coherence that defied any model of coincidental dream content. They described water, dark water, still water, water that did not reflect light the way it should. They described stone structures, partially submerged, covered in a dark growth that several of them referred to independently as the black. They described a sound, not a sound any of them could name, but a vibration, a low and persistent hum that they said came from below the water, from somewhere deep. They described a sky that was not a sky. Several participants used nearly identical phrasing to express this, saying things like, "There's something above but it isn't sky," or, "The ceiling of it, the top of everything, it's too close." They described steps, always steps, leading down into the water. Stone steps, ancient, worn smooth, descending at an angle into dark water. And they described the acute, overwhelming feeling that they had been to this place before. Not in a dream. Not in a memory. But in some other way that none of them, asleep or awake, could articulate. This is where I need to pause and address something directly, because I know some of you are already thinking it. This sounds like fiction. This sounds like the setup for an ARG, or a creepypasta, or a very well-produced piece of collaborative storytelling. And I want to be honest with you, when I first encountered this story, that was my assumption too. I spent the better part of 3 months trying to debunk it before I ever considered making this video. And I want to walk you through what I found, because the answer is not as clean as I wanted it to be. The University of Edinburgh's Department of Psychology did employ a Dr. Alistair Khan during the relevant period. He is listed as a co-author on several published papers related to parasomnia and sleep stage linguistics. He left the university in early 2015 and currently holds a position at a private research institute in Zurich. He has not commented publicly on the sleep study, and he did not respond to my inquiries. The Dovecot building is real. It was used for auditory and sleep research. It was decommissioned in 2017 and has since been repurposed as administrative office space. The study itself does not appear in the university's public research archive, which is not, in itself, unusual. Defunded studies, particularly those that did not produce published results, are routinely excluded from institutional databases. But what is unusual is that there is no record of a formal defunding decision. No committee minutes. No correspondence. The study simply stops appearing in any documentation after November 2014, as though it were quietly and efficiently erased. Dr. Maren Voss is harder to trace. She published 3 papers as a postdoctoral researcher at Edinburgh between 2013 and 2014. After that, her academic record goes silent. No further publications. No listed affiliations. No professional profiles. For all intents and purposes, she left academia entirely in late 2014 or early 2015 and did not return. Until the podcast. The Shared Room appeared on a small, independent hosting platform in March of 2022 with no announcement, no social media presence, and no identifying information beyond a single line of text in the show description. Recordings from a study that was never supposed to exist. Presented without alteration. The first episode was 4 minutes long. It contained no narration, no introduction, no context. It was simply a recording, a raw audio file, complete with the low hiss of ambient room tone and the faint, rhythmic sound of someone breathing in sleep, in which a woman's voice, slurred but intelligible, says the following. The water doesn't move. Even when you touch it. Even when you step into it. It doesn't move. It knows you're there but it doesn't move. The second episode, uploaded 1 week later, was 6 minutes long and contained recordings from 2 different rooms, synchronized and layered so that the listener could hear both voices simultaneously. A man's voice, soft, almost tender, says, "There are marks on the walls." Someone was counting. And a woman's voice, from a different room, responds, and I use that word deliberately, because the timing, the cadence, the intonation all suggest a direct response. They stopped counting. They stopped because the number was wrong. Over the following months, episodes appeared at irregular intervals. Some were just audio. Others, beginning around episode 12, included brief, measured narration from a voice that listeners have widely attributed to Voss herself, though this has never been confirmed. The narration is spare. Clinical. She does not editorialize. She provides context, room numbers, timestamps, participant identifiers, and occasionally notes details about the polysomnography data, pointing out that during the convergence events, participants showed synchronized shifts in brain wave activity, moving into identical sleep stages within seconds of each other, sometimes from opposite ends of the normal sleep cycle. Let me say that again, because I think it's important. The sleepers were not merely speaking at the same time. Their brains were synchronizing. Participants who were in light stage 2 sleep would abruptly drop into deep stage 3 at the exact moment a convergence began. Others would shift from REM into non-REM states simultaneously. It was as though something was reaching into their individual sleep architectures and pulling them into alignment, tuning them, like instruments, to the same frequency. By episode 20, the podcast had accumulated a small but devoted following. A subreddit appeared. A Discord server. People were transcribing the recordings, mapping the descriptions, trying to build a composite picture of the place the sleepers were describing. And this is where the story takes its second turn, the one that, honestly, keeps me up at night. The place the sleepers described has specific, identifiable features. Partially submerged stone structures. Steps descending into dark, still water. Walls marked with what appeared to be tallies or counting marks. A low, persistent vibration. A sky that was too close, or not a sky at all. An overwhelming sense of recognition, of having been there before, of belonging there, of being expected. Listeners began cross-referencing these descriptions with real locations. They searched geological databases, historical archives, travel photography collections, satellite imagery. For months, nothing matched. The features were too specific and too strange, the combination of submerged architecture, the counting marks, the wrongness of the sky, to correspond to any well-known site. Then, in late 2023, a listener posted a series of photographs to the subreddit that stopped the community cold. The photographs were taken in a remote coastal area of northwestern Scotland. I am deliberately not naming the specific location, and I'll explain why shortly. They showed a natural rock formation at the edge of a sea cliff, partially exposed at low tide, in which what appeared to be hand-carved stone steps descended from a narrow ledge into a tidal pool of unusually dark, still water. The stones were covered in a black algae or mineral deposit. The walls of the surrounding rock showed marks, regular, evenly spaced, vertical lines, that the photographer described as looking like someone had been counting days. The photographer was not a listener of the podcast. They were a geology student on a field survey who had posted the images to a separate forum entirely. A listener found them through a reverse image search and brought them to the community's attention. The match was not perfect. But it was close. Unsettlingly close. Close enough that within weeks, 3 separate listeners had independently traveled to the area and confirmed the existence of the formation. They posted their own photographs. They posted video. And they reported something that does not appear in any of the original geological survey data. They reported a sound. A low vibration, just at the edge of hearing, that seemed to emanate from below the water. One described it as a hum, like a machine running somewhere deep underground. Another said it was less a sound than a pressure, a feeling in the chest, in the teeth, in the inner ear, that intensified the closer you stood to the water's edge. One of them, and this is in a public post, verifiable, time-stamped, wrote the following: "I have never been to this place before. I have no memory of it. But standing at the top of those steps, looking down into that water, I had the most overwhelming sensation that I had been here many, many times, and that something down there was aware I had come back. I want to be careful here. I am not asserting that this location is definitively the place described in the sleep study recordings. Correlation is not causation, and the human mind is spectacularly good at finding patterns where none exist, at projecting meaning onto ambiguous stimuli. It is entirely possible that the geological formation is a coincidence, that it happens to share superficial features with the place the sleepers described, and that the emotional responses of visitors are a product of suggestion, of having been primed by the podcast and the community's analysis to expect something uncanny. But there are details that are harder to dismiss. In episode 31 of The Shared Room, released in January of 2024, the narrator, presumed to be Voss, broke from her usual clinical tone to address the community's discovery directly. She said, and I'm quoting from the transcript, "Several of you have written to me about a location in Scotland. You've sent photographs. You've asked if this is the place. I am not going to answer that question. What I will tell you is that in 2015, approximately 4 months after the study was terminated, I visited a location matching the descriptions in the recordings. I went alone. I did not tell anyone. I stood at the top of a set of stone steps that descended into dark water, and I heard the sound. I heard it clearly. And something else happened that I am not ready to discuss." She has not released a new episode since. The subreddit is still active. The Discord server is still active. People are still analyzing the recordings, still debating the location, still reporting their experiences. And a pattern has emerged in those reports that I find deeply, specifically troubling. People who have visited the site, and again, I want to emphasize, I am choosing not to name or pinpoint the location, report a consistent set of experiences that go beyond the sound and the sense of recognition. Several have reported unusually vivid dreams in the nights following their visit. Dreams about water. About descending. About stone. About a presence below the surface that is not hostile, exactly, but is vast, and aware, and waiting. 3 visitors have reported that they began talking in their sleep after their visit, for the first time in their lives. And 2 of them, a couple who visited the site together in February of 2024, reported that they began talking in their sleep simultaneously, saying the same words at the same time, in a language neither of them recognized. I want to take a step back now, away from the specific evidence, and talk about what this might mean. Not in terms of the paranormal. I'm not here to tell you that this is proof of telepathy or shared dreaming or some kind of psychic phenomena. I'm here to follow the evidence and to sit with the discomfort of not having a clean explanation. There is a concept in psychology called shared intentionality, the idea that human minds are uniquely capable of aligning with each other, of creating joint attention, of thinking together in ways that go beyond simple communication. We see it in conversation, in music, in the synchronized movements of crowds. Some researchers have speculated that this capacity runs deeper than we typically acknowledge, that at some fundamental level, human consciousness is not as individual, not as contained, as we assume it to be. There is also a growing body of research on what's called neural coupling, the phenomenon in which the brain activity of 2 people in conversation begins to mirror each other, their neural patterns falling into synchrony in ways that correlate with the depth of their mutual understanding. This has been documented in waking subjects who are actively communicating. It has never, to my knowledge, been documented in sleeping subjects who are physically isolated from each other. Until, perhaps, now. But even neural coupling doesn't explain this. Neural coupling requires a communication channel, speech, gesture, shared visual attention. The participants in the Edinburgh study had no communication channel. They were sealed in separate rooms. They could not hear each other, see each other, or interact in any way. Whatever was synchronizing their brain activity, whatever was allowing them to conduct a coherent conversation across floors of a building while unconscious, it was not operating through any known mechanism. And then there is the place itself. The location. The steps, the water, the sound. If the sleepers were simply sharing a dream, if some unknown process was linking their unconscious minds, then the content of that shared dream should, by all psychological models, be derived from their individual experiences. It should be built from memory, from association, from the raw material of their personal histories. People dream about places they've been, things they've seen, emotions they've felt. The brain, even in sleep, works with what it has. But the place the sleepers described was not drawn from their personal histories. None of the 11 participants had ever visited the area of Scotland where the matching geological formation was later found. Several had never been to Scotland at all. And the details they provided, the specific quality of the water, the texture of the stone, the marks on the walls, the quality of the sound, the oppressive closeness of the sky, were consistent not only with each other but with the physical reality of a location none of them had ever seen. They were not remembering a place. They were not imagining a place. They were, by every available indication, perceiving a place, accurately, in detail, together, while asleep in separate rooms. I don't have an explanation for this. I've spoken with researchers in parasomnia, in cognitive neuroscience, in parapsychology, a field I approach with considerable skepticism but could not responsibly ignore in this context, and none of them have offered a framework that accounts for all of the data. The parasomnia researchers say the synchronized timing is inexplicable. The cognitive neuroscientists say the shared content is inexplicable. The parapsychologists say this is consistent with certain models of non-local consciousness, but even they admit those models are speculative and unfalsifiable. What I keep coming back to, what I cannot set aside, is the nature of the conversation itself. Because it was not just a description of a place. It was a negotiation. A reckoning. The sleepers were not passive observers. They were participants in something. They were discussing whether to descend the steps. They were debating what was below the water. They were expressing fear, and reluctance, and, this is what disturbs me most, a resigned familiarity. As though they had had this conversation before. As though they had been through this process many times, and the outcome was always the same. In one of the later recordings, Night 10, I believe, a participant in room 3 says, with a clarity and a calmness that is almost worse than panic, we keep coming back here. Every time we sleep, we come back here. And every time, we go a little further down. Another voice, from another room, another floor, responds, it's not us coming back. It's this place. It reaches. It reaches and it finds us when our eyes are closed. And a third voice, barely above a whisper, it's found more than us. It's found so many. The counting on the walls. That's not days. That's people. I mentioned earlier that I chose not to name the specific location in Scotland. I want to explain that decision, because it's not one I made lightly. Part of it is practical, the site is in a remote area, the terrain is dangerous, and I do not want to be responsible for directing people to a place where they could be injured. The tidal conditions alone make it hazardous. But there is another reason, and I'll be direct about it. I visited the site myself. In March of 2024. I went alone. I told my editor where I was going and when I expected to be back, but I did not bring a crew. I brought recording equipment, a camera, a directional microphone, a portable audio recorder. I wanted to verify the physical features described in the recordings and by the community. I wanted to hear the sound for myself, or confirm that there was no sound. I found the steps. They are real. They are carved into the rock, not natural, not accidental. Someone, at some point, cut steps into this stone, leading down into a tidal pool that is, at low tide, unnervingly still and unnervingly dark. The black mineral deposit or algae is real. The marks on the surrounding rock face are real. They are regular. They are evenly spaced. They look very much like tallies. And I heard the sound. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It is a low, steady vibration that you feel in your sternum before you hear it with your ears, like standing near a generator in an adjacent building. It has no obvious source. It does not fluctuate. It does not stop. I stood at the top of those steps for approximately 15 minutes. I recorded audio and video. I took photographs. And the entire time, I experienced a sensation that I am going to describe as accurately as I can, because I think accuracy matters more than comfort here. I felt recognized. Not watched. Not observed. Recognized. In the way that you feel recognized when you walk into a room and someone who knows you, someone who has been waiting for you, looks up. There was an attention to it. A specificity. It was not the passive indifference of a landscape. It was something else. I left. I drove back to my hotel. I ate dinner. I went to bed. And for the first time in my adult life, I talked in my sleep. I know this because I left my audio recorder running. A habit from years of this kind of work. The recording is 4 hours long. Most of it is silence. But at 3:12 a.m., clearly, unmistakably, in my own voice, I said 7 words that I have no memory of saying, that I did not consciously compose, and that I am not going to repeat in this video. I will tell you this, they were not my words. The phrasing was not mine. The cadence was not mine. It sounded like me the way a sentence in a foreign language sounds like your voice when you read it aloud. The sound is yours, but the structure belongs to someone else. Or something else. I have not been back to the site. I have not listened to the full recording again. I have kept a copy in a secure location, and I have shared it with one person, someone I trust, someone with relevant expertise, and their assessment was that the audio is consistent with the recordings from the Edinburgh study. Not in content, but in quality. In character. In the specific acoustic signature of a voice that is speaking but not choosing what to say. I don't know what is happening at that location. I don't know what happened in the Dovecot building in the autumn of 2014. I don't know where Maren Voss is, or why she stopped releasing episodes, or what happened to her at that site in 2015 that she said she wasn't ready to discuss. I don't know why the study was defunded with no paper trail. I don't know why Alastair Khan left the country. But I know what the recordings contain. And I know what the sleepers said on night 11, the last night of the study, the night before the project was terminated. On night 11, at 3:33 a.m., all 11 participants entered synchronized stage 3 deep sleep simultaneously. This had never happened before in the study. Deep sleep is typically the quietest phase, the phase in which somniloquy is least likely to occur, in which the brain is at its most disengaged from sensory input and motor output. All 11 participants began speaking at 3:34 a.m. Not in turns. Not in dialogue. In unison. 11 people, on 3 floors, in 11 sealed rooms, said the same words at the same time, in the same rhythm, with the same cadence, as though reading from a shared text that existed nowhere in the physical world. The sentence was short. 14 words. The podcast has not released this recording. It has never been made public. But in the final moments of episode 31, the last episode, the narrator reads it aloud, and her voice, for the first and only time in the series, shakes. We have always been here. You have always come. The water remembers. Now descend. 14 words spoken by 11 strangers in their sleep. And here is the part that I have not been able to verify, the part that rests on a single source, a forum post from someone claiming to be a former technician at the university who was called in to disassemble the recording equipment after the study was shut down. I present it not as fact but as testimony, and you can weigh it as you see fit. This person claims that on the morning after night 11, when the research team arrived to begin what they assumed would be night 12, they found that all 11 participants were already awake. Sitting up in their beds. In their sealed, windowless, clockless rooms. They were all awake, and they were all sitting in exactly the same position, legs over the side of the bed, feet flat on the floor, hands on their knees, head slightly bowed. As though waiting. As though the night was over and they knew what came next. When the researchers entered each room, each participant said the same thing. Not the same sentiment. The same words. In the same order. With the same flat, emptied effect. I know where it is now. I can find it while I'm awake. The study was terminated that morning. The participants were released. Standard post-study health screenings were conducted. Follow-up was, according to the available records, never performed. 11 people walked out of the Dovecot building on that November morning and, as far as I can determine, went back to their normal lives. I have been able to identify and locate 7 of them. 3 declined to speak with me. 2 did not respond to my outreach. 1 agreed to a brief, off-the-record conversation in which she said only that she remembered nothing about the study and preferred not to discuss it, and something about the precision of that denial, I remember nothing, felt less like a statement of fact than a boundary she had drawn and was unwilling to cross. The 7th participant is the one that troubles me most. His name is in the study records, so it is, in theory, findable, but I am choosing not to share it. He is the man from room 7, the one whose voice appears in more convergence events than any other participant. The one who said, on night 6, you don't choose. You're already there. He left Edinburgh in 2015. He moved north. He moved to a small village on the northwestern coast of Scotland, approximately 9 miles from the location matching the sleepers' descriptions. He has lived there for 9 years. He has lived there alone. I don't know what that means. Maybe it means nothing. People move. People seek quiet. People settle in remote places for reasons that have nothing to do with dark water and stone steps and sounds that come from below. Maybe he wanted to be near the sea. Maybe the rent was cheap. Maybe it's a coincidence. Or maybe, when he said, you don't choose, you're already there, he was telling the truth. Maybe the place chooses. Maybe it calls, and you go, and you descend, and the water remembers, and the counting on the walls goes up by 1. There is no ending to this story. There is no resolution. The podcast is silent. The subreddit is active but increasingly fractured. Half its members are convinced the whole thing is an elaborate hoax, the other half are planning expeditions. Marin Voss, if that is who ran the podcast, has not been heard from since January 2024. Alistair Kahn remains in Zurich and does not answer emails. The Dovecot building is an office now. People sit at desks where the beds were. They take calls in the rooms where 11 strangers spoke in unison in their sleep. And the site in Scotland is still there. The steps are still there. The water is still dark. The marks on the walls are still being counted by no one you can see. I started this video with a question, or at least the implication of one: what happened in Edinburgh in 2014? And I'll be honest with you, I no longer think that's the right question. I don't think what happened in Edinburgh was the beginning. I think it was an observation. A measurement. A brief, accidental window into something that has been happening for a very long time, in a place that is very old, to people who have no idea it's happening until they close their eyes. The right question, the one I can't stop asking, the one that follows me into the dark when I turn off the lights, is simpler than that. How many of us have been there? How many of us have descended those steps in our sleep, spoken in a conversation we don't remember, contributed to a count we can't see? How many of us have stood at the edge of that dark, still water and been recognized? And what happens when the counting is done? I'm going to leave you with one final detail. It's small. It might mean nothing. But I've learned, doing this work, that the small details are usually the ones that matter most. When I reviewed my own sleep recording, the one from the night after I visited the site, I found, as I mentioned, a single instance of somniloquy. 7 words, at 3:12 a.m., in a voice that was mine but didn't feel like mine. But there was something else on the recording that I didn't notice until weeks later, when I was reviewing the file with better headphones in a quieter room. At 3:11 a.m., 1 minute before I spoke, there is a sound. Faint. Almost inaudible. Easily mistaken for room tone or microphone noise. But it's not noise. When you isolate it, when you clean up the audio, when you amplify it and strip away the ambient frequencies, it resolves into something identifiable. It's a voice. Not mine. Someone else's. Coming from nowhere, from no source in the room, from no device, from no adjacent space. A voice, speaking softly, patiently, as though it has said these words many times before, to many people, in many rooms, across many years. It says, "We've been waiting for you. Take the first step." I did not take the first step. I did not go down those stairs. I don't know what would have happened if I had. But I think about room 7. I think about the man who moved 9 miles from that place and has lived there, alone, for 9 years. I think about what it might mean to take the first step, and the second, and the third, and to keep going down into dark water that doesn't move when you touch it, that knows you're there, that has known you were coming since before you were born. I think about the counting on the walls. And I wonder, when I fall asleep tonight, if I'll be back at the top of those steps. And I wonder how many of you, after hearing this, will be there too. And I wonder if the water will be closer.